What we need is the original salvation plan. And to get saved the same way that the first people were born again. In John chapter 4, let me direct your attention there. There's two events in Scripture that we're going to mention here directly. John chapter 4 is one of them. It's a familiar passage. It speaks of Jesus meeting the Samaritan woman at the well. Without getting into particulars, she was confused about proper worship practices. The religious elite in northern Israel and southern Israel taught opposing and contradictory teachings. There were years of history in which both practiced opposing religious worship and practices. The poor woman, she was caught in the middle. She knew that she didn't know as much as those religious elite people did. However, if somehow she could have done a simple historical study, she could have found out the origin of the religious practice of worship in northern Israel was due to a split in political power. A ruler by the name of Jehu didn't want the people in northern Israel to keep worshiping down in Jerusalem because he feared they would reunite with southern Israel and kill him. You can find this in 1 Kings 12, verse 28 and following verses. So he constructed golden calves and he presented them to northern Israel and told them to worship them instead of going to Jerusalem. If we do a little looking back into history, we can get some clarity too on differing and opposing views. And today we're talking about the original new birth experience and the original plan of salvation. There's another example that tells us to look back a little bit in history to get a clearer vantage point or viewpoint. Matthew chapter 19 deals with a topic that we won't go into too deeply today, but we're going to talk about the mechanics of the discussion that happened there in Matthew chapter 19. Jesus faced a similar dilemma to what the Samaritan woman and to what we face today as the religious elite are pointing at scriptures, trying to validate their contradictory viewpoints about how to be saved. The religious elite and system was corrupt during Jesus' earthly ministry. So the lady at the well, and then, of course, his discussion in Matthew chapter 19. But the system was corrupted and leading people away from God's ways. It was not a pretty picture. That day, the cards were stacked against Jesus. He was staring down the religious system who were hiding behind a name brand preacher on that day, who was Moses, and behind hundreds of years of history of perverted practice, yet they were saying it was right. And they were going to fight tooth and nail, and they were going to show Jesus up on that day. But Jesus cuts through all of the twisted theology and all the perverted practices that day with one statement. One statement. Jesus said, "From the beginning, it was not so." Jesus was saying the practice that they were championing that day was not the same practice that was practiced from the beginning. And he began to tell them that not only is that true, but God didn't change his mind when your preacher did and when you did. God still will not accept this practice. And the same is true regarding the method in which we get saved today. God implemented through his death on the cross and his suffering, dying, raising again. He paid dearly to implement a way to be saved, and he's not going to accept hundreds of years of perverted practice. He's not going to accept popular methods, popular preachers. It's not going to work. Just as Jesus said in Matthew chapter 19, God was unimpressed. He still had his same vantage point, viewpoint, opinion, which God doesn't really have the opinion. His is just plain right. So we're going to borrow Jesus' technique as we proceed, and we're going to look at the way that people got born again from the beginning and the way that people got saved from the beginning, like we get saved today. We're not going all the way back to Genesis 3:15 and speaking about the coming Messiah, etc. We're talking about how did the first people get saved. So we're going to borrow a page from Jesus' playbook today and use the same principle to find out the original salvation plan and the first new birth. If you are in local Birmingham, Alabama, we want to connect with you and help you today. Please contact us at the email address listed on your screen. May God bless you. Thank you for the time spent with us, and have a wonderful, born-again, blessed day.